On May 12, 1985, a couple became concerned when they noticed their neighbors hadn't left their house for several days and newspapers were accumulating at the door. Suspecting something was wrong, the husband decided to investigate. As he approached the window, he heard a baby crying and promptly called the authorities. When the officers arrived and entered the home, they were met with a horrifying scene. This is the heartbreaking case of the Eastburn family. The Eastburn family, a military household, resided in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Gary Eastburn was a captain in the U.S. Air Force. He met Catherine in the 1970s. Their young love blossomed into a lifelong commitment. For the Kansas girl, it seemed like love at first sight. After dating for 5 years, they married. They had 3 beautiful daughters, Cara, Erin, and Jana. Katie was a stay-at-home mom as they moved frequently due to Gary's military career. In 1983, they were stationed at Pope Air Force Base, where Gary served as the air traffic control chief. In May 1985, Gary was training at a squadron's officer school in Montgomery, Alabama, while his family stayed in Fayetteville. Life was as routine as it gets for a military family until they planned a move to England for Gary's job. Unfortunately, their hoped-for peace was shattered by a man in a horrific way. In addition to the Eastburn family, this story also involves a man named Timothy Bailey Hennis. Timothy Hennis, a Minnesota native, was navigating life at his own pace. Publicly, he appeared as an average man, a blonde-haired but easily noticeable due to his towering height of over 6 feet. He grew up in Rochester, Minnesota, and graduated from Mayo High School in 1976. Hennis worked in Rochester until he enlisted in the United States Army in 1980, marking a significant change in his life. He went on to marry Angela, who gave birth to their daughter Christina in 1985. Around the same time, Hennis was employed as a parachute rigger at Fort Bragg. The paths of the Eastburns and Timothy crossed on Tuesday, May 7, 1985, when he responded to an ad Catherine placed in the local paper to rehome their family dog. Due to their upcoming move to London, they couldn't bring the dog and were hopeful to find her a loving new home. Coincidentally, Hennis's family was seeking a dog, as their current one did not get along with their newborn. That Tuesday, Catherine invited Timothy over, and after some conversation, he took the dog to see if she would adapt to his family. By this time, Gary had been at the military base for a few weeks. Over the years, they had developed a habit of calling each other every Saturday morning since Gary spent most of his time on base. However, on Saturday, May 11th, Catherine didn't answer Gary's calls. Sensing something was wrong, Gary contacted the Fayetteville Police Department. Officers responded and visited the Eastburn home, but no one answered the door, and the house lights were off. Before leaving, they left a note for Catherine to contact her husband. On Sunday, May the 12th, the Eastburns' neighbors, Sergeant Bob Seafelt and his wife, noticed newspapers piling up outside. Reflecting on the past few days, they realized Catherine's car hadn't been moved. Bob decided to investigate, and although no one answered his knocking or the doorbell, he thought he heard a baby crying inside. So he went home and called the Eastburns' babysitter, who arrived quickly. She looked through the window and saw Jana lying in her crib with her arms outstretched. She tried to enter the house to get the baby, but Bob convinced her to wait for the police. The first officer to arrive opened a window in the baby's room and handed Jana to Bob. He asked the neighbor to wait outside while he searched the house, as there was a strong odor he needed to investigate. Inside, the officer found the lifeless bodies of Catherine and Erin and called for backup. Further inspection revealed Cara's remains as well. While the police secured the scene, Jana was cared for at the Seafelt home. The girl was sobbing and covered in feces. Doctors who treated her determined she was severely dehydrated and warned that her condition was critical. Without immediate help, she faced imminent death. Catherine, age 31, was discovered without pants or underwear, wearing a torn blouse and bra with multiple stab wounds and signs of assault. 3-year-old Erin was found in her parents' bedroom, also bearing stab wounds and blunt force injuries to her chest and back. 5-year-old Cara was located in her bed, appearing to hide under a blanket with various chest injuries. All 3 victims had their throats cut. Police established that 2-year-old Jana had been alone in her crib for 3 days until neighbors found her. When asked later about that night, survivor Jana told a child psychologist she hid because bad men were coming, possibly instructed by her sisters to remain hidden, which might have saved her from harm. Investigators also determined the perpetrator spared Jana's life, as he didn't think there was a risk that she would recognize him. Forensic experts collected samples from both the crime scene and the victims' bodies. Evidence included hair strands, fingerprints, blood traces, and seminal fluid, with the latter found during Catherine's examination. Despite the severity of injuries, little blood was found at the scene, yet a luminol test indicated blood had been wiped on walls and in the bathroom. Detective Jack Watts personally contacted Gary to inform him about the tragic events involving his family. When the phone rang in Gary's bedroom, he hoped to hear Catherine's voice, but upon learning it was a detective, he braced for devastating news. The officer instructed Gary to return immediately without disclosing details over the phone. That evening, Gary boarded a plane back to Fayetteville, unsure of what awaited him. Upon arrival, he faced the heartbreaking reality that his wife and 2 daughters had been murdered. However, he found solace in knowing Jana had survived. Gary cooperated fully with detectives despite his deep depression. Initially a suspect, his alibi of being in Alabama weeks prior to the crime quickly cleared him of suspicion. Gary's account highlighted 2 key details that piqued investigators' interest: the advertisement seeking a new home for their dog and Catherine's visit from a stranger on the 7th. According to Gary, Catherine had mentioned in a letter that a compassionate man had taken their dog in hopes of integrating it into his family. After obtaining Gary's statement, investigators escorted him home to ascertain any missing items. Gary reported that Catherine's bank card and a piece of paper containing her password were absent. Additionally, an envelope containing around $300 was nowhere to be found. The Eastburns babysitter also informed the police that Catherine had expressed concerns about being stalked. The family had endured harassing phone calls for months, with the caller occasionally making explicit references to Catherine. A few days before the tragedy, the babysitter answered a call from a woman named Angela who was interested in seeing the dog. The babysitter recorded Angela's details for Catherine to return the call. However, the note containing Angela's information was not discovered during the house search. During the investigation into the perpetrator's identity, 20-year-old Patrick Cohn approached investigators with potentially valuable information. Patrick recounted seeing a man leaving the Eastburn residence on the evening of Friday, May 10th, the day authorities believed the tragedy occurred. Patrick recalled that around 3:30 a.m. that Friday, while driving home, he observed a white Chevrolet Chevette parked in the driveway and witnessed a man exiting the house. Patrick provided a detailed description of the man, noting he was white, tall, with blonde hair, a broad nose, and a mustache. He mentioned the man wore a black jacket and jeans and was carrying a trash bag at the time. Investigators requested the young man's assistance in creating a composite sketch of the suspect. Subsequently, authorities disseminated the sketch and description of the individual. Additionally, a plea was issued for the man who had responded to Catherine's dog ad to come forward to the police. This appeal had the intended consequence. Timothy Hennis was at home with his wife watching the news when he saw the advertisement. He was stunned to realize that he was the person who had responded to the ad and bore a striking resemblance to the sketch. Without hesitation, Timothy immediately left his residence with his wife and daughter, driving his white Chevrolet to the police station, where he volunteered to assist in any way possible. Timothy cooperated with investigators for several hours without legal representation. When describing his interaction with Catherine on the 7th, he recounted parking his car at his residence around 9 p.m. and walking up the driveway with a leash in hand. According to his account, he knocked on the door and was greeted by a woman who invited him inside. Timothy continued, stating that Catherine informed him she had just put her 3 young daughters to bed and proceeded to introduce him to the dog. He mentioned liking the dog, but expressed interest in seeing how she would interact with his Spitz. Consequently, he agreed to take the dog home to his wife and daughter and assured Catherine they would stay in touch. Investigators established that the crimes occurred between Thursday evening and early Friday morning. It was on the 10th that newspapers began accumulating on the porch of the residence. Additionally, neighbors had spotted Catherine earlier on the 9th. Based on this evidence, law enforcement questioned Timothy about his activities that evening. He stated that he had driven his wife and daughter to a relative's house and then returned home. Authorities requested Timothy to provide samples of hair, blood and seminal fluid, but forensic analysis did not link him to the crime. Simultaneously, police prepared a lineup for Patrick, who had identified Timothy from a photograph taken during a previous arrest due to bounced checks. When presented with 6 images, Patrick promptly identified Timothy. Timothy was released after several hours of questioning, and he drove back home. Police knew they had found their main suspect, and from that point on, they focused their investigation squarely on him, initiating interviews with his neighbors. Residents reported seeing him spending 5 hours near his home, burning items in a barrel, which drew attention as it was an unusual activity for him. Additionally, the dry cleaners confirmed that he had brought in his jacket for cleaning the day after the crime occurred. Another significant detail came from the landlord of Timothy's residence, who mentioned that Timothy promptly settled a $350 rent debt shortly after the incident. After the interrogations, Timothy and Angela believed their interactions with the police were over, but they were mistaken. Detectives arrived at their residence with an arrest warrant, charging the sergeant with sexual assault and first-degree murder of Catherine and her 2 daughters. In the course of the investigation, a woman came forward as a witness, providing crucial information linking the defendant to the use of the victim's debit card. Investigators determined that the stolen card was used at 10:54 p.m. on May 10th and 8:56 a.m. on May 11th. According to the witness, she had used the ATM shortly before seeing a tall blonde man in camouflage pants drive away in a light-colored vehicle. The timing described by the witness aligned with the recorded banking transactions. Detectives connected the $300 cash withdrawal to the previously mentioned overdue rent payment. Timothy retained a prestigious legal team, represented by Gerald Beaver and Billy Richardson, renowned as top attorneys in North Carolina. Prosecutors proposed a plea bargain to Timothy's defense, offering 2 counts of second-degree murder with a probable sentence of 2 consecutive life terms. He rejected the offer, maintaining his innocence and refusing to plead guilty. The defense strategy aimed to undermine the credibility of a key prosecution witness. They replicated the moment Patrick identified a man as Timothy by revisiting the Eastburn house under similar lighting and weather conditions. However, the witness did not spot the suspect during the reenactment. An unexpected development arose during the site inspection when a neighbor approached them, revealing he had observed a van parked outside the family's residence on the night of the crime. He recalled seeing a white man with short hair, accompanied by companions. A subsequent reenactment with Patrick suggested he might have misidentified the suspect. The defense attorneys then focused on discrediting a prosecution witness, the woman who had initially claimed to have seen the suspect at the ATM. During cross-examination, she recanted her statement, asserting that she had not witnessed anyone there that day. Timothy's first trial commenced in 1986, approximately a year after the triple homicides. The prosecution's case relied on circumstantial evidence, lacking any physical proof linking the sergeant to the murders. One theory proposed was that Timothy's advances towards Catherine were rebuffed, leading to a sexual assault followed by his decision to eliminate her and her daughters to prevent identification. During the trial, the prosecutor portrayed the events at the Eastburn residence as sheer madness, describing it as one of the most tragic incidents in the nation's history up to that time. His argument was accompanied by a presentation of numerous disturbing crime scene photographs. Patrick served as the key prosecution witness before the jury, positively identifying the defendant as the man he had observed leaving the Eastburn home in the early hours of May 10, 1985. On July 4, 1986, following 10 hours of deliberation, a jury convicted Timothy on 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of first-degree sexual assault. Just 4 days later, on July 8th, he received a death sentence and was transferred to death row at Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina. However, this marked only the conclusion of the initial chapter in a protracted legal saga, as Timothy's defense remained steadfast in their quest to establish his innocence. By 1988, his legal team appealed to the North Carolina Supreme Court, citing investigation inconsistencies, false testimony, evidence suppression, and improper use of graphic materials that had swayed the jury's verdict. Consequently, the justices ruled in Timothy's favor, overturning the previous trial and initiating a new one that commenced in April 1989. During this retrial, the defense concentrated on discrediting Patrick's testimony, arguing its inaccuracies from the first trial. New witnesses emerged in Timothy's support, including a newspaper delivery woman who testified that at 1:45 a.m. on the day of the incident, she had spotted a long-haired man driving a light-colored van near the Eastburns' residence. In a similar vein, the defense presented another witness, a tall teenager with blonde hair named John Raupour, who testified that he frequently walked near the Eastburn residence late at night when he couldn't sleep. He admitted passing by around 3 a.m. on May 10, 1985, mentioning he often wore a cap and had a black jacket resembling the one described by the witness. This testimony allowed the defense to argue that Patrick might have mistaken John for the suspect that critical day, planting reasonable doubt about Timothy's culpability in the minds of the jury. The defense also highlighted that shoe prints discovered outside the Eastburn house were 3 sizes smaller than those of the defendant. Additionally, it was noted that a blood sample from a towel did not match Timothy's blood profile. Further bolstering their case was an anonymous letter processed by the post office on the same day as the trial. The letter expressed remorse to Timothy and confessed to the crimes committed. The trial spanned 3 weeks, and after 2 days of deliberation, the jury unanimously acquitted Timothy of all charges. Timothy left the courtroom as a free man. He later re-enlisted in the military and in 1998 relocated with his wife and children to Fort Lewis, Washington. After the initial trial, Gary moved on with his life and focused on caring for Jana. Despite scrapping plans to relocate to London following the death of his wife and 2 children, he concluded in 1988 that a change of surroundings was necessary and decided to relocate to England. While there, he was informed of the need to return to the United States for a retrial. Once the trial concluded, he returned to England where he met and married an Air Force nurse. In 1998, Gary returned to the US, settling in a town 20 kilometers from Fort Lewis. In 2005, the unresolved Eastburn family murder case was discussed at a seminar on advanced criminal intelligence techniques for detectives. It was there that Larry Trotter, a homicide detective from Cumberland County, learned about seminal fluid samples collected during the initial investigation, which had previously not yielded any matches. Aware of advancements in DNA analysis, Larry arranged for further testing of these samples stored by the sheriff's office. A year later, the results from the State Bureau of Investigation lab were returned. With the test results came the long-awaited revelation. The DNA profile matched that of Timothy Bailey Hennis. Adding to the clarity, the forensic scientist affirmed that the sample was 1 billion times more likely to belong to Timothy than to any other resident of North Carolina. Larry Trotter promptly shared this breakthrough with the district attorney, who then contacted Gary Eastburn. Confident that they had the right suspect and now armed with concrete evidence, the DA transferred the case to Fort Bragg's legal team, who presented it to the base commander general. In response, the commander ordered Timothy to be activated for duty to face 3 charges of murder and a court-martial. On September 26, 2006, accompanied by a military lawyer, a Fort Bragg CID officer, and 2 police officers, Timothy was formally served a letter directing him to report to base within 30 days. Despite the pending charges, he reported for duty and began working part-time in an office role, receiving regular pay and benefits. In August 2007, the commander of the 16th Airborne Corps ordered Timothy Hennis to stand trial in a court-martial on 3 counts of premeditated murder. By December 2007, Hennis filed an appeal arguing that the Army lacked jurisdiction, but his petition was denied in April 2008. In May 2008, Hennis further appealed the court-martial decision to the United States Army Court of Criminal Appeals, only to have it dismissed the following month. Continuing his efforts in September 2008, Hennis appealed to the United States Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces, which also dismissed his appeal. Undeterred, Hennis pursued another appeal in December 2009 at the United States District Court for the Eastern District of North Carolina, but once again it was rejected in March 2010. Timothy's court-martial commenced on March 17, 2010, marking 21 years since his previous acquittal. Colonel Patrick Parrish presided over the proceedings, where prosecutors emphasized the new DNA evidence as the pivotal difference from previous trials. The prosecution presented crime scene photographs and a series of family photos provided by Gary, depicting his smiling wife and daughters. Following a 3-week trial, Timothy Hennis was convicted of premeditated murder on April 15, 2010, and sentenced to death. He was dishonorably discharged from the Army and confined to Fort Leavenworth's disciplinary barracks in Kansas. He remains the only individual to undergo 3 trials from not guilty to guilty verdicts. Presidential approval is required for military executions, a rarity since the 1960s, making his actual execution unlikely. In February 2020, the Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces denied his appeal. Gary Eastburn commented on the sentence, expressing doubt about Timothy's imminent execution, citing the last Army execution in 1961. In a 2010 interview with the Seattle Times, Gary remarked, "I'm perfectly content if he spends the rest of his life in prison. But if they do execute him, it's no more than he deserves." It is sad and unfortunate what all the victims faced against this monster. As we reflect on this heart-wrenching tale, our thoughts are with the victims whose lives were tragically cut short and the loved ones they left behind. In the quiet suburbs of Perris, California, a family lived behind closed doors, hidden from the world's scrutiny. But what unfolded within those walls would shock the nation and shed light on a dark reality that few could fathom. This is the story of the Turpin family, a tale of secrecy, abuse, and the resilience of the human spirit. David and Louise Turpin seemed like an ordinary couple, raising their 13 children in a seemingly typical suburban home. However, behind the facade of normalcy lay a horrifying truth. A truth that would come to light in a moment of courage and desperation. David Allen Turpin, born to Betty and James Turpin on October 17, 1961, in Princeton, West Virginia, hailed from a devoutly religious family and experienced a typical upbringing. During his time at Princeton High School, he actively participated in various extracurricular activities such as the Bible Club, Chess Club, Science Club, and a cappella chorus. Following his high school graduation, David enrolled in Virginia Tech University in Blacksburg, Virginia, where he pursued a degree in electrical engineering. Renowned for his brilliance in computer engineering, he later secured positions at prestigious defense technology companies like Northrop Grumman and Lockheed Martin. In contrast, Louise Anna Turpin entered the world on May 24, 1968, in Princeton, West Virginia, as the eldest among 6 siblings born to Phyllis and Wayne Robinette. Wayne, a preacher, and Phyllis, who also worked as a Walmart cashier while singing in the church choir, provided the backdrop for Louise's upbringing. The childhood of the Robinette children was extremely distressing. Wayne and Phyllis frequently disagreed, leading to a harsh treatment of their children. From a young age, Louise, her sisters, and her mother endured sexual abuse from a family member. Teresa, Louise's sister, revealed that this traumatic experience was a significant, unspoken secret within the family. Elizabeth, Louise's younger sister, later revealed to People magazine that Louise fiercely shielded her younger siblings. She described Louise as gentle, compassionate, and nurturing, striving to comfort them amidst their parents' intense conflicts and shield them from their predatory relative. When Louise was 15 years old, she encountered David Turpin, 22, at church, sparking a romantic connection between them. Fearful of how Louise's parents would react, they chose to keep their relationship clandestine. Upon discovering the truth, Phyllis, Louise's mother, eventually accepted their bond, influenced by David's upbringing in a devout Christian family and Louise's assurances. However, they opted to conceal their relationship from Wayne, Louise's father, aware of the potential fury it would provoke from him. In January 1985, David, aged 23, visited Princeton High School, his alma mater from 5 years prior, where Louise was currently enrolled. Through persuasion, he convinced the school staff to allow him to remove Louise from class. Willingly, Louise accompanied David out of school, embarking on a journey southward with plans to elope. Upon realizing Louise's absence, her parents notified the authorities. Before authorities could intercept them, the couple had already reached Texas, intending to marry in secret. Surprisingly, they acquiesced to returning to West Virginia without resistance. Upon their return, the couple anticipated Wayne and Phyllis's wrath, yet were met with surprising calmness. Initially, Wayne directed his anger towards Phyllis for permitting their daughter's relationship with David. However, he eventually recognized the challenge of separating two deeply in love. Consequently, Wayne consented to their marriage, which took place in a modest ceremony in Perrysburg, Virginia, on February 11, 1985. 2 years later, Wayne and Phyllis parted ways, with Wayne assuming the role of Chief Deputy Assessor for Mercer County. Following their marriage, Louise began to distance herself from her family. Freed from her parents' strictures, she eagerly embraced a life of autonomy and happiness. In 1988, Louise welcomed their first child, a daughter, followed by another addition 18 months later in 1990. Subsequently, David's job transfer with General Dynamics prompted the family's relocation to Fort Worth, Texas, settling in the modern neighborhood of Meadow Creek. With David's lucrative income, the Turpin family enjoyed a lavish lifestyle. Eager to showcase her newfound prosperity, Louise extended an invitation to her family from West Virginia to visit. Having grown up without financial abundance, Louise seized the opportunity to exhibit her current success. David and Louise generously covered the expenses, including travel and accommodations, for their family's visit. In 1991, the Turpin family welcomed another addition, a son, further enriching their lives. By 1992, despite David's substantial six-figure earnings, the Turpin family found themselves deeply entrenched in debt. However, this financial strain didn't hinder their extravagant lifestyle or deter them from expanding their family. In 1993, Louise discovered she was expecting their third child, a girl. As was customary, Louise's family visited the Turpin household annually, unaware of the financial difficulties looming over them. Determined to maintain appearances, Louise assumed all financial responsibilities for her family's visit, shielding them from the harsh reality of their financial woes. In 1994, the eldest daughter of the Turpin family embarked on her first-grade journey at Meadow Creek Elementary, presenting herself with greasy and disheveled hair, soiled attire, and a noticeable lack of regular hygiene. These visible indicators hinted at the neglectful treatment she received from her parents. Unfortunately, her appearance subjected her to ridicule from peers who taunted her for her uncleanliness. In 1995, the Turpin family welcomed another addition, a son. The subsequent year, the family of 6 embarked on a vacation to visit Louise's family. Despite their precarious financial situation, the Turpin family appeared unconcerned and continued to spend lavishly, treating their relatives to expensive dining experiences. In 1996, Louise's sister, Elizabeth, accompanied the Turpin family back to Fort Worth for the summer holidays. During their return journey, the family made a stop at a casino in Louisiana. Louise entrusted Elizabeth with the care of the children, while she and David indulged in gambling, urging her to keep their activities secret. Elizabeth was taken aback by Louise's behavior, as their Christian upbringing had instilled in them the belief that gambling was morally wrong. Unfortunately, their gambling venture resulted in losses, sparking a heated argument between David and Louise. David accused Louise of having a gambling problem and blamed her for their financial setback. While staying at the Turpin household, Elizabeth was startled to discover the family's unsettling dynamics. David and Louise displayed a distinct lack of affection towards their children, and strict control permeated every aspect of the children's lives. Even basic activities like using the bathroom or having a meal required permission from the Turpin couple. Additionally, Elizabeth found David's behavior particularly disturbing, as he would intrude on her privacy by entering the bathroom and watching her while she showered, a habit that left her feeling uneasy and uncomfortable. In May 1997, the Turpin family welcomed their 5th child. By September of the same year, concerns regarding the hygiene of the eldest daughter escalated, coupled with troubling indications that suggested possible instances of sexual abuse. Consequently, she was brought to the principal's office to discuss her home life, though no subsequent action was taken to address the matter. In 1998, the family expanded once again with the arrival of their 6th child. Despite David's lucrative job, the family's finances continued to deteriorate due to their regular gambling habits, leading to significant financial strain. In the spring of 1999, the eldest daughter ceased attending school, followed by the other children, as Louise and David claimed they were being homeschooled. By late 1998, the Fort Worth home was foreclosed upon by the bank, prompting the Turpin family to relocate to Rio Vista, Texas, a less populated area. However, their new residence was maintained in a deplorable state, which undoubtedly disgusted the new owners upon moving in. The house was marred by dirt, stains, and emitted a foul odor, leading the new occupants to suspect the presence of excrement. Before moving to the Rio Vista house, the Turpin family welcomed their seventh child. Between 2001 and 2007, the Turpin family expanded their household with the addition of 5 more children. As neglect escalated, the Turpin parents resorted to physical abuse, including slapping, choking, and whipping their children with belts, often for trivial reasons, such as not seeking permission to use the restroom. Shockingly, the children were permitted to bathe only once a year. Despite purchasing appetizing food, David and Louise cruelly denied their children access to it, and forcing them to endure starvation while taunting them with the sight of the untouched meals. Instead, the children were fed inexpensive frozen food, resulting in severe malnutrition, evidenced by stunted growth, pallid complexions, and a youthful appearance disproportionate to their actual ages. The lack of socialization and psychological abuse further hindered their cognitive development. In 2004, the Turpin family relocated to an upscale trailer, abandoning the Rio Vista house due to its deplorable condition, characterized by accumulated garbage and deceased rodents, rendering it uninhabitable. In 2008, during a conversation with her sister Teresa, 40-year-old Louise divulged startling revelations that left Teresa utterly shocked. Louise confessed that she and David no longer attended church, a stark departure from their upbringing in devout Christian households. Instead, the Turpin couple had turned their focus towards Satanism and engaged in activities involving Ouija boards. Louise went on to disclose their participation in swinging, a lifestyle involving extramarital sexual encounters with other couples. Shockingly, they would leave their younger children at home under the supervision of the older ones while they met strangers they had encountered online for these encounters. It became apparent that Louise was the primary participant in these activities, with David supporting her endeavors by providing transportation and waiting for her during these encounters. Teresa was deeply troubled by the drastic transformation of her once caring and responsible sister into someone unrecognizable. The Turpin family relocated to Murrieta, where they made frequent visits to Disneyland, capturing countless joyful family moments dressed in matching attire. Louise ensured these pictures were sent to her family, with whom she had ceased communication via Skype and restricted access to the children. These photos served as the sole reassurance to Louise's family that the children were seemingly in good spirits, despite appearing thin. It became apparent that the Turpin couple harbored an obsession with Disneyland, evident in their repeated visits, and the emphasis placed on documenting these experiences through photographs. In 2014, the Turpin family made a move to Perris, California, situated approximately 20 miles north of Marietta. By this point, the abuse inflicted upon the children had escalated to extreme levels of violence. David and Louise resorted to restraining the children to their beds using ropes, and if any escape attempt was made, they would replace the ropes with chains and padlocks. The children endured confinement within their room for approximately 20 hours each day, subjected to the oppressive stench that permeated the air. In 2015, the family welcomed their 13th and final edition. Shortly thereafter, the entire family embarked on a trip to Las Vegas to commemorate the 30th wedding anniversary of David and Louise. The couple opted to renew their vows at the Elvis Chapel, marking the occasion with a celebration that starkly contrasted with the reality of their abusive treatment towards their children. Faced with the relentless horrors of her situation, the 17-year-old girl made a courageous decision to seek help by reporting the abuse to the authorities. In a daring act, she escaped through a window and swiftly contacted the police using her phone. During the harrowing 20-minute call to 911, she recounted in detail the appalling living conditions and the myriad abuses endured by her and her siblings. Equipped with photographic evidence of their dire circumstances, she awaited the arrival of law enforcement. When the police reached the scene, they were confronted with a frail and emaciated figure, resembling a child no more than 10 years old. Presenting the damning photos of the house's interior, the girl guided the police to the front door, where a bewildered Louise stood, unaware of the impending revelation of the family's dark secrets. As soon as the police stepped into the house, they were assaulted by a foul and nauseating odor that made it nearly impossible to breathe through their noses. Despite the overwhelming stench, they pressed forward and made a shocking discovery. 3 of the younger children were shackled to their beds. The entire house was engulfed in filth and littered with garbage, with the children deprived of access to basic necessities such as restroom facilities. Acting swiftly, the police escorted the younger children to the Riverside University Medical Center, while the adult children were taken to the Corona Regional Medical Center for evaluation and care. On January 14, 2018, authorities apprehended David and Louise Turpin on suspicion of committing acts of child abuse and torture. Just 4 days later, the couple faced a litany of charges, with each of them being accused of 12 counts of torture, 7 counts of abusing a dependent adult, 6 counts of child abuse and neglect, and 12 counts of false imprisonment. Additionally, David Turpin faced an additional charge of engaging in a lewd act with a child under the age of 14. Among the children, the 2-year-old stood out as the sole one without any visible signs of abuse or torture. In addition to the mentioned abuses, the Turpin couple subjected the children to further cruelty, such as throwing them downstairs, resulting in nerve damage from prolonged physical mistreatment. Additionally, the children lacked fundamental life knowledge, including basic understanding of medicine. Despite purchasing toys, the Turpin couple prohibited the children from playing with them. Furthermore, the children were forced to stay awake until the early hours of the morning, typically until 4 or 5 a.m., and were not permitted to go to bed before then. On January 24, 2018, the judge imposed a restriction on David and Louise, preventing them from interacting with the children for 3 years, with communication allowed only through their legal representation. Subsequently, on June 21, 2018, the evidence presented was deemed substantial enough to warrant a trial for the Turpin couple. Finally, on February 22, 2019, David and Louise altered their pleas, both pleading guilty to a total of 14 charges, including torture, abuse of a dependent adult, false imprisonment, and child endangerment. During the court proceedings, the parents had a heartfelt reunion with their children. Based on the children's statements, it appeared that all of them had forgiven their parents and harbored feelings of love towards them. Each individual expressed their desire for their parents' well-being and conveyed that they were thriving in their respective lives. David and Louise, visibly emotional, offered sincere apologies for their past actions and expressed their deep love for their children, wishing them success in life. Subsequently, the Turpin couple received a sentence of life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 25 years. As of March 2022, Louise, aged 53, is eligible for parole in 2037, while David, aged 60, is also eligible for parole in the same year. The revelations of abuse and neglect within the Turpin household sent shockwaves through the community and beyond, leaving us questioning how such horrors could have remained hidden for so long. In the aftermath, the community rallied together to support the survivors, offering them hope and healing as they embarked on the long road to recovery. The Turpin family story serves as a stark reminder of the importance of vigilance, compassion, and the responsibility we all bear to protect the most vulnerable among us. On April 10, 2008, when Chris Short returned home in the afternoon, he was horrified to discover his stepdaughter collapsed on the floor. Chris immediately contacted the police, who were met with a scene straight from a horror movie upon arrival. Megan was found half naked, laying in a large pool of blood with multiple stab wounds, and she was pronounced deceased on the spot. Her limbs were bound with tape, and initial medical assessments hinted at signs of sexual assault. The detectives were deeply disturbed by the brutality of the crime, and questions lingered in the minds of everyone. Who could commit such an atrocity against an innocent girl beloved by all? Investigations were carried out, eventually leading to the revealing of the shocking culprit no one had even suspected. This is the heart-wrenching case of Megan Landowski. Nestled by the Chesapeake Bay in Portsmouth, Virginia, stands a bustling seaport town, renowned for hosting both the U.S. Navy and Coast Guard. Its streets, adorned with trees, provide home to the naval officers and their families. Among them was Navy officer Chris Short, alongside his wife Angela and 3 stepchildren, Elizabeth Gable, Megan Landowski, and Corey Landowski. Having spent a year stationed in Guantanamo Bay in Cuba, Chris was transferred to a naval hospital in Portsmouth, much to the relief of the family. The eldest among the siblings, 16-year-old Megan Landowski, wasted no time in enrolling in dance classes upon their relocation. Megan harbored a deep passion for dance, showcasing remarkable talent and aptitude from the outset. Starting with ballet, she swiftly expanded her repertoire to encompass various genres. Her mother described her as beautiful, friendly, and talented, and Megan seamlessly integrated into her new academic environment at Woodrow Wilson High School. Possessing a magnetic personality, Megan effortlessly attracted classmates, quickly forging friendships. Despite attending a prestigious high school primarily for dance, Megan expressed a desire to attend a regular high school to be with friends from her neighborhood. Described as vivacious and kind, Megan had a natural inclination for making connections, embracing friendships with everyone she encountered. Thursday, April 10th, 2008, dawned like any other bright spring morning. Megan woke up early for school, engaging in a conversation with her mother regarding an impending test before heading off for her classes. After exchanging farewells, they went their separate ways. Unbeknownst to Angela, this would be the last time she laid her eyes on her daughter alive. Megan's school day ended early and she went home. Her mother told her that she expected her call when she reached home. Upon arrival, Megan left a voicemail detailing how her day went, reassuring her mother of her safe return, and ended by telling her she loved her. She then went on to begin preparing lunch for herself. However, things took a dark and disturbing turn. Around 4 p.m. that afternoon, Chris, Megan's stepfather, returned home to find the door open. Though initially unconcerned, knowing Megan had been warned about leaving it open, he intended to reprimand her. Calling out her name yielded only silence as he moved through the house. Upon entering the kitchen, he was confronted with a harrowing sight. Megan, lifeless on the floor, a victim of murder. Chris would later recall how he found her, likening her to a porcelain doll, hauntingly still and staring out to space. Local detective Doug Funkhauser was en route to celebrate his anniversary with his wife when he received the distressing call about a young girl's murder in town. Rushing to Roberts Court in Portsmouth, he was confronted with a horrifying sight. Bloodstains on the door handle caught his attention as he approached the residence. Inside, in the kitchen, he discovered the grisly scene. The teenager's partially naked body sprawled on the floor. Megan lay amidst a sizable pool of blood, bearing multiple stab wounds across her back, neck, face, and throat, with her mouth sealed shut with tape. For Detective Funkhauser, who was a seasoned investigator, this case stood out as one of the most brutal he had ever encountered, compounded by the fact that the victim was a young child. The thought of his own 3 children intensified his determination to bring the perpetrator to justice. Despite Megan not having invited the killer into the house, there were no signs of forced entry. However, a leaf discovered inside, traced back to the bush by the window, indicated that the assailant had gained access through the first-floor window. Upon entry, the assault initiated in an upstairs bedroom, evident from the disarrayed bed that suggested a struggle had ensued. Her underwear lay discarded on the floor, and beneath the left corner of the bed was a tape dispenser that seemingly matched the tape used to bind her arms and face. Bloodstains on the tape were collected for analysis. Additionally, police gathered pillows, sheets, and blankets from the bed. As forensic experts delved deeper, the bedroom yielded increasingly disturbing evidence. Seminal fluid discovered on the duvet and in Megan's underwear indicated she had been sexually assaulted before the vicious attack downstairs. Megan sustained 43 stab wounds, 11 inflicted after her death. As mentioned earlier, she was found naked from the waist down, with her arms bound behind her using tape. It didn't take long for the forensic team to identify the potential murder weapon. They noticed a knife was missing from the holder on the kitchen counter, later locating it in the sink. It was determined that Megan was initially attacked in her room but managed to run downstairs before being fatally assaulted. The perpetrator then traversed the house, leaving behind footprints. They then washed their hands in the sink, leaving behind one of the 2 knives used in the murder. The other knife, taken from the kitchen knife block, was discovered in a storm drain nearby. Detectives knew that they needed to arrest the killer, and they had to do it urgently. The investigation commenced quickly, with officers canvassing the neighborhood, diligently seeking witnesses who might have observed or heard anything untoward during the time of the crime. Alarmingly, no one came forward with any pertinent information. It appeared the perpetrator had managed to escape in broad daylight. Fear gripped the town, with parents anxiously concerned for the safety of their children, many too frightened to sleep at night, knowing a killer was still at large. Following the initial shock after their daughter's murder, Angela and Chris promptly informed the police of their suspicion regarding the perpetrator's identity. They implicated a former acquaintance with a troubled past, confident in their belief. When Megan had just turned 16 years old, she was sexually assaulted by Robert Hickey, a Navy colleague of her stepfather, Chris. Robert served as a fellow Navy tech alongside Chris. Chris mentioned that they quickly developed a close bond and regularly extended invitations to the Hickey family. Following this, Megan's demeanor had changed, characterized by being withdrawn and a decline in academic performance. Chris inquired about her well-being, but Megan initially hesitated to confide in him. Eventually, Chris persuaded Megan to share what bothered her, and she opened up. Robert was secretly sexually assaulting her. Chris was angered and disgusted, immediately cutting off all connections with the Hickey family and reporting the abuse. At this point, Megan's parents had initiated legal action just 5 months before her murder, with a trial awaiting. They now suspected that Robert had killed Megan to prevent her from testifying against him, fearing the potential damage to his reputation and the risk of incarceration. Megan had even voiced concerns about him coming after her, and tragically, it appeared her apprehensions had materialized. Officers were dispatched to Hickey's residence for a search, but unfortunately, they found no incriminating evidence linking him to the murder. However, upon later examination of his computer, clear signs of an attempt to erase the hard drive were discovered. A recently deleted file was uncovered during the search, revealing illicit photos of underage children and resulting in Hickey being found in possession of child porn. This discovery elevated Robert as the primary suspect. He was brought in for questioning regarding the murder, with authorities hoping for a confession. Despite appearing visibly nervous during the interview, Robert claimed to have been at the Navy base the entire day of Megan's murder, denying any involvement and asserting that he had not left the base on the day of the incident. After corroborating his timeline with his colleagues, the police realized that there was a period of time during which Robert hadn't been seen, raising the possibility of his involvement in the murder. Surveillance footage from the base was obtained, but no sign of Robert leaving was observed. Nevertheless, he remained a suspect and couldn't be entirely ruled out. A DNA swab was taken from Robert to compare with the DNA found at the crime scene. The results came as a surprise. There was no match. Robert was not Megan's killer. This setback left officers feeling disheartened as they found themselves without leads or suspects. Attention shifted towards Chris, who had found her body. After obtaining a DNA sample, he was swiftly ruled out as a suspect. Additionally, all of Megan's family members, including her younger brother Corey, were cleared. An autopsy later revealed the brutality of the murder, with Megan being subjected to what was termed as an overkill. The level of violence suggested intense anger from the perpetrator, raising questions about their motive. Given Megan's popularity and lack of enemies, it seemed likely that the culprit was someone known to her. But with no apparent enemies, the mystery deepened regarding who would commit such a horrific act. As the investigation yielded no suspects, Megan's parents grappled with the unsettling prospect of her case remaining unresolved, depriving them of justice for their daughter. Detectives decided to delve deeper into Megan's school life, considering the prospect of a clandestine boyfriend, an admirer, or an adversary within her school community. They interrogated Megan's close friend in hopes of uncovering potential leads, but she was unable to offer any valuable insights. Subsequently, police interviewed other acquaintances from Woodrow Wilson High School, revealing that Megan had engaged in a few romantic relationships, but none of them were really serious. While none of these individuals emerged as suspects, authorities opted to collect DNA samples from them as a precautionary measure to eliminate any potential connections. Forensic experts specializing in biogeographical analysis re-examined the DNA evidence collected from the crime scene in an effort to determine the geographical origin of the perpetrator. Their analysis indicated that they were seeking an African-American male. Despite 6 months elapsing with no significant breakthroughs in the case, a breakthrough occurred when a cooperative classmate provided the police with valuable information: a list of boys whom Megan had occasionally engaged in flirtatious interactions. Upon review, all individuals on the list except one had already been interviewed. This exception was 17-year-old Robert Lee Barnes. Apart from her actual school education, Megan had also been enrolled in a performing arts program at Churchill High School, where Robert Barnes was also a participant. Megan had once told her close friend that she believed Robert had feelings for her, feelings she did not reciprocate. Robert Barnes, a talented violinist, was regarded as a diligent student who never encountered any disciplinary issues at school and was not known to cause trouble. He shared a close friendship with Megan and had even visited her home on several occasions. According to her parents, he was always polite and very kind. When police located him for questioning regarding Megan, the interview followed the standard procedure, just like the other previous interviews they had carried out. Robert informed investigators that Megan was a kind and pleasant individual, expressing disbelief at the notion of anyone wishing her harm. He mentioned their participation in recitals together and their occasional hangouts. Police didn't find anything suspicious during the interview until towards the end of it. When asked if he would provide a DNA sample, Robert hesitated before refusing, which raised eyebrows among investigators since all of Megan's other classmates had been cooperative. Robert politely explained that his mother wouldn't agree to it, but police clarified that parental consent wasn't necessary, especially considering Robert was now 17 years old. Despite this, Robert declined once again. Investigators couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss with Robert Barnes. After concluding the interview, they instructed him to seek his mother's consent for the DNA sample and to contact them afterward. The following day, investigators received a call from Robert requesting a meeting. When asked if he had sought his mother's consent, he replied, "No, but you can have my bubble gum." Robert removed the gum from his mouth, placed it in a latex glove, and handed it over. Despite his change of heart, investigators still remained suspicious of Robert. Later on, the detective received a call from the lab analyzing the bubblegum. They inquired about the sample's origin. After confirming that he had observed Robert placing the gum into the glove, they questioned whether he had been under constant observation, as the DNA, much to their surprise, matched that of a female. Robert had switched the gum he was chewing with a different piece that he provided as his sample. On October 23, 2008, Robert Barnes was summoned for questioning once more, and this time accompanied by his mother to confront him with the DNA findings. During the interview, after he was questioned about the bubble gum, Robert slipped up by stating, "This happened on a Thursday." Up to that point, none of the individuals interviewed by the police had been aware of the exact day and date of the murder. When officers pointed this out to him, he offered an absurd explanation. He spun a tale alleging that on that particular day, Megan had asked him to come by her home. Upon arrival, he allegedly discovered Megan being held at gunpoint by a masked individual. According to Robert, the assailant then turned the firearm on him, coercing him to tie Megan up. He further claimed that he was compelled to commit sexual assault on Megan under duress. Subsequently, he asserted that they all went downstairs, where the gunman proceeded to stab Megan after seizing a knife. Robert asserted that the assailant then forced him to cut himself, ensuring his blood would be present at the crime scene. Robert had fabricated this narrative in an attempt to portray himself as a victim and explain away any potential incriminating evidence against him. However, law enforcement remained skeptical of his account and did not buy any of his claims. Presenting him with the evidence of footprints, they questioned why only his footprints were found and not those of the alleged assailant. Robert's mother intervened, advising him to stop speaking, and vouched for his character, claiming he was a good and innocent kid. The police took a sample of his actual DNA this time round. Upon DNA analysis, the results confirmed a match between Robert's DNA and the assailant's, undermining his claims. Robert Barnes was arrested for the murder of Megan Landowski. The news left Megan's parents in shock, as they couldn't fathom that the quiet boy who used to ride the school bus with their daughter could be capable of such violence. According to police, Robert likely gained entry to the home through the window that afternoon, surprising Megan in her bedroom before committing the atrocious acts. Megan managed to flee downstairs, but Robert pursued her, stabbing her with a kitchen knife and continued to do so even after her death. Afterward, he departed the scene, carrying on with his life as if nothing had occurred. The investigators speculated that Robert developed an unhealthy obsession over Megan, while Megan only desired a platonic relationship between them. When Robert's advances were rebuffed, he resorted to coercion, ultimately spiraling down a destructive path that culminated in tragedy. In September 2009, Robert opted for a special plea arrangement that spared him from being tried as an adult, as he had turned 18. He admitted guilt to charges of first-degree murder and aggravated sexual battery, Robert Lee Barnes received a 42-year prison sentence and remains incarcerated at the Red Onion State Prison in Wise County, Virginia. Whether driven by love, desire, bitterness, or the sting of rejection, none of these justified Robert's actions and his atrocious deeds to someone he claimed to love and care for. Instead of accepting to move on, he chose a dark path that led to a tragic fate, ending the life of an innocent soul and, in the process, ruining his life and affecting the lives of Megan's loved ones. Megan Landowski's tragic story mirrors countless others, highlighting the perilous consequences that can arise from such situations. We extend our heartfelt prayers and thoughts to her departed soul and the loved ones she left behind. On the Sunday afternoon of January 1st, 2006, a man and his daughter arrived at his friend's family house for a New Year's get-together party. He finds the door open, which was a usual thing the hosts did during their parties. Upon entering, he encountered a thick cloud of smoke, prompting him to alert others, and they contacted the authorities. Firefighters swiftly arrived, extinguished the fire, but tragically discovered the lifeless bodies of the party hosts, the Harvey family. What initially seemed like a fire-related incident turned into a chilling revelation. The Harveys had not succumbed to the flames, but rather fell victim to something far more sinister, and it was now a murder investigation. This left the investigators not only emotionally shaken, but also bewildered at the grim turn of events. What really happened here, and who had murdered them? This is the heartbreaking case of the Harvey family. "49-year-old Brian Tabor Harvey, a local icon, gained recognition in the 1980s as the singer-songwriter for the underground indie band House of Freaks. Despite parting ways professionally with his musical partner Johnny Hott in the 90s, they remained close friends. Brian, a devoted musician, took the stage for the last time at a New Year's Eve show that was sadly and unbeknownst to him the final night of his life. On the other hand, 39-year-old Catherine Elizabeth Grabinski achieved success as the co-owner of the popular toy store World of Mirth, located in Richmond's Carytown district. A community pillar, she was an artist involved in various endeavors, from painting sets for community theater to working as a pastry chef and waitress. Catherine had an older sister, Shelley Grabinski, and was also the half-sister of actor Stephen Culp, known for his roles in The West Wing and Desperate Housewives, among other films. The paths of Brian and Catherine would eventually cross at the Border Cafe on Main Street, where Catherine worked, and Brian frequently visited with Johnny. In 1990, they tied the knot, and the House of Freaks released an album featuring a song dedicated to Catherine titled "I Got Happy." The couple welcomed 2 daughters into their lives. Stella Ann, their first daughter, was born in 1996. Reflecting on fatherhood, Brian expressed on a fan website, "I think I've come pretty close to knowing why I'm here on Earth since my daughter was born. I think you have to be hopeful about life when you have a child. You owe it to them." Their second daughter, Ruby May, was born in 2001. While Brian continued his musical pursuits, he also took on a job working on computers for the Henrico County school system. Kathy, on the other hand, embarked on the entrepreneurial path by opening World of Mirth, a unique toy and gift store that became a cornerstone in the fashionable Carytown neighborhood. Her brother, Stephen Culp, explained in court, "She wanted to create a space where parents could come with their kids and spend time, and kids could play with the toys. There's no guns or swords or anything like that there. It's a wonderful place." The Harveys established their home in a stately old neighborhood on the south side of Richmond that had large trees, porch swings, and ivy-covered surroundings. They had a family room in the basement of their 2-story red brick house. The beautiful family were well known and beloved in the community of Richmond, and no one really had bad intentions towards them, or so everyone thought. On New Year's Day, Sunday 2006, Brian, his wife Catherine, and their 2 daughters, 9-year-old Stella and 4-year-old Ruby, anticipated a bustling day ahead. Their plans included hosting a lunchtime barbecue for friends and family, prompting them to rise early and make preparations for the upcoming festivities. It had become a tradition for them to throw a party every New Year's Day, gathering their extensive circle of friends for the occasion. On that particular Sunday morning, Brian ventured outside their residence in the fashionable Woodland Heights area of Richmond, Virginia, to retrieve the newspaper. Absorbed in the front-page news, He returned indoors without locking the door, but since they lived in a relatively safe neighborhood, this wouldn't normally have been a cause for concern. Typically, they also didn't secure the door on party days, leaving it open for arriving friends. However, on this fateful day, unbeknownst to Brian, opportunistic criminals were clandestinely lurking nearby. Catherine busily prepared cookies in the kitchen for the anticipated guests who were due to arrive shortly. Suddenly, she heard voices emanating from the living room, assuming someone had arrived earlier than expected. To her dismay, upon approaching, she was confronted not by familiar faces, but by two unknown men. In the tense moments that ensued, Brian, Catherine, and young Ruby were directed downstairs to the basement playroom. Stella, who had spent the previous night at a slumber party, had yet to join them. Once the family was confined to the small space, the intruders used electrical cords and packing tape to bind them, assuring that cooperation would prevent any harm towards them. As they proceeded to ransack the house, a knock on the front door interrupted them, occurring around 10 a.m. The apparent leader of the group released Catherine from her restraints and instructed her to deal with whoever was at the door. However, before permitting her to leave, he issued a stern warning. If she sought help or attempted to escape, her daughter and husband would be murdered. As Stella's arrival was imminent, a distressed Catherine found herself caught in a difficult dilemma. Answering the door would expose her daughter to the same peril as the rest of the family, while ignoring the persistent knocking could incur the wrath of the assailants who clearly held the upper hand. Ultimately, she concluded that cooperation was the most prudent choice, and with that decision, she opened the door. In an unexpected turn of events, Stella swiftly darted past Catherine and made her way directly to the playroom, where the family usually spent a lot of time together. Acting quickly, Catherine intercepted her daughter's friend, preventing her from following. Kirsten Perkinson, the friend's mother, later recounted her surprise at Catherine's unusual behavior, which deviated from her typical exuberance. In response to Perkinson's inquiry about her well-being, Catherine, normally lively, claimed to be unwell. She gestured with a circular motion to the side of her head, mimicking a gun to indicate someone might be considered crazy, abruptly ending the conversation and shutting the door. This peculiar gesture would later trouble Perkinson, who wondered if Catherine was attempting to convey something. Was Kathy being monitored by the intruders? Could she have attempted an escape, potentially saving herself and Stella? However, the dilemma of leaving Brian and Ruby behind weighed heavily on Catherine's mind. Perkinson departed, planning to return later for the party. With all four Harveys now inside the house, Catherine returned to the basement and discovered a terrified Stella, who had been securely tied up alongside the rest of the family. As everyone lay bound and vulnerable, chaos erupted. Suddenly and without warning, the man in charge revealed a knife sourced from the Harveys' own kitchen and began slashing their throats, including those of the young girls. Expressing frustration that they were not succumbing quickly enough, he instructed his accomplice to bludgeon their heads. However, the partner refused, prompting the assailant to grab a claw hammer and ruthlessly strike them repeatedly until they stopped moving. After removing Catherine Harvey's wedding ring, the assailants ignited the room, using wine as an accelerant to conceal evidence of their heinous acts. As they made their escape from the residence, they indulged in a plate of freshly baked cookies that sat cooling on the kitchen counter and stole a laptop, DVD player, and various other items. Rushing out, they entered the getaway vehicle parked outside. Inside the getaway vehicle was a woman who was in a relationship with one of the men, serving as a lookout during what was initially intended as a simple robbery. They swiftly departed, leaving the scene just as inconspicuously as they had arrived. Sometime later, at around 1:30 p.m., Johnny Hott arrived for the celebratory gathering. Upon opening the front door, he was greeted by a thick cloud of smoke pouring out. Alarmed by the pungent odor of burning, he alerted the neighbors, who quickly dialed 911. As emergency responders entered the premises and dealt with the fire, unfortunately they encountered 4 bodies in the smoldering basement, still intact. Investigators at the scene soon deduced that the fire did not result in their demise, but rather a more sinister cause of death was unveiled, and this had now become a murder investigation. Police officers and paramedics, who were accustomed to witnessing the darkest aspects of humanity, were reported to have found the harrowing scene so distressing that some openly shed tears. The revelation that the parents had been compelled to witness the brutal demise of their children, and vice versa, was sad to imagine. Autopsies disclosed that Brian and Catherine met their end due to blunt force trauma to the head. Stella, tragically, succumbed to a combination of blunt force trauma and smoke inhalation, suggesting she was alive when the fire ignited, despite her grievous injuries. Ruby's demise resulted from stab wounds to her neck and back. Despite initiating an immediate investigation into the murders, the authorities had little evidence. Recognizing the potential for criminals to divulge information, they appealed to the public for assistance. Unfortunately, their breakthrough came a few days later. On January 6th, a woman named Latoya Pawley contacted the police, urging them to conduct a welfare check on her friend, 21-year-old Ashley Baskerville Tucker. Pawley expressed her concerns as she believed that Ashley's boyfriend, 29-year-old Ray Joseph Dandridge, and his uncle, 29-year-old Ricky Javen Gray, were involved in the Harvey family's murder. Ricky, who was slightly younger than his nephew by a few months, was said to be the one in charge. The shocking revelation continued as Pawley disclosed that the two men had stashed evidence of their crimes at her residence. She revealed that Gray and Dandridge had recently visited her home with a laptop that had an image of the Harveys as its wallpaper. The Harvey case had by then received extensive coverage in the news, leaving no doubt that the laptop belonged to them. Additionally, Latoya provided intricate details about a scheme devised by Ashley, Gray, and Dandridge to rob Ashley's parents. In this plan, Ashley was supposed to act as a hostage, allowing Ricky and Gray to extort money from the Baskerville Tuckers, which would portray Ashley as innocent. Despite being privy to the entire plan and being offered a role, Latoya declined, becoming suspicious of the trio. The uncle and nephew were the only ones that returned hours later, and when asked about Ashley's whereabouts, they cryptically replied, "Ashley has gone bye-bye." This statement heightened Latoya's concerns, prompting her to contact the police. It was this crucial information that investigators needed to start connecting the dots. Having confirmed Latoya's information, investigators proceeded to the residence where Ashley resided with her mother, 46-year-old Mary Baskerville Tucker, and stepfather, 55-year-old Percy L. Tucker. To their horror, they encountered yet another gruesome scene. Upon entering the home, they discovered the lifeless bodies of all three victims, subjected to a brutal method similar to the Harvey family's fate. The victims were bound, gagged, and had their throats mercilessly slit. Duct tape, wound tightly around their heads, inflicted additional suffering on Mary and Percival, who both displayed deep neck lacerations. Percival had a sock forcibly inserted into his throat. Ashley, tragically, was found to have been suffocated with a plastic bag. The common cause of death for all three was determined to be suffocation and torture. Suspecting the presence of thrill killers, law enforcement agencies from across the region collaborated in a joint effort to apprehend them before they could perpetrate further atrocities. Similar to the Harveys, Percival and Mary led quiet lives without harboring any enemies. Percival worked as a forklift operator, while Mary was employed by a housekeeping business. Their tranquil existence was shattered by the betrayal from their own daughter, ultimately leading to the tragic demise of an innocent couple who sought to enjoy their golden years. The investigators swiftly uncovered the crucial link between the Harveys and Tuckers. Ashley was found wearing Brian Harvey's wedding band, the same one that was missing and taken from Catherine. With this revelation, urgent action was imperative to apprehend Gray and Dandridge before they could inflict further irreparable harm. Having traced their movements back to their home state of Pennsylvania, Gray and Dandridge were captured in Philadelphia on January 7th. In his questioning, Dandridge asserted that the murders had been conceived by his uncle, and he had merely followed instructions. Faced with these incriminating accusations, Gray readily admitted to the killings of the Harveys and his involvement in those of Ashley and her parents. While these straightforward confessions were enough to leave anyone astounded, it became apparent that this was just the beginning. Gray provided gruesome, intricate details of both family massacres, emphasizing that their actions were driven solely by the need for money. During the Harvey family murders, unbeknownst to everyone, he was under the influence of PCP. PCP, or phenylcyclohexylpiperidine, is a drug known for inducing auditory and visual hallucinations, as well as violent behavior. Throughout his confession, Gray maintained a chilling, emotionless stare. His utter indifference towards the lives he took led investigators to believe they were face-to-face with the devil incarnate. It was also revealed that Gray was responsible for the murder of his wife, Trevor Terrell Gray, whose body was uncovered in a shallow grave on Brookside Avenue in Washington, Pennsylvania. The couple had been married for 6 months prior to her tragic murder, and resided together in a house owned by Trevor's family, along with Gray's nephew, Ray. According to Trevor's parents, the Grays frequently engaged in bitter arguments. Claw marks on Ricky's forearm were even discovered on the day Trevor's body was found. Despite being interviewed by Washington police, neither Gray nor Dandridge were initially considered suspects. Marna Squires, Trevor's mother, alleged that law enforcement assumed Trevor had succumbed to a drug overdose, leading to a lackadaisical investigation into her death. Although Trevor's demise was deemed suspicious at the time, a homicide investigation was only initiated after Gray's confession in 2006. On December 31, 2005, a brutal assault unfolded, where 26-year-old Ryan Carey was attacked by two men in front of his parents' Arlington home, who were later identified as Gray and Dandridge. The assault left Carey with severe beating and stab wounds to the chest, neck, and arms, resulting in a near-fatal assault that caused him to spend the following 2 weeks in a coma. Additionally, he permanently lost the use of his right arm. On February 9, 2006, Ricky Gray faced 5 charges of capital murder, while Ray Dandridge was indicted on 3 counts of murder for his involvement in the Baskerville Tucker killings. Despite their earlier admissions, both men pleaded not guilty. After a 6-month trial, the jury found Gray guilty on all counts, leading to a life sentence for the murders of Brian and Catherine Harvey. In response to the brutal taking of Stella and Ruby's lives, the court deemed nothing less than a death sentence appropriate. In September 2006, following his uncle's conviction, and after learning the verdict in his case, Dandridge opted for a plea deal to evade the death penalty. He received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. In December 2006, Ricky Gray faced charges from Culpeper County for the murder of Cheryl Warner, a 37-year-old legal secretary and mother of 3. Warner was discovered shot and hanged by an electrical cord in the basement of her Burning Reaver residence. Gray entered a not guilty plea. However, on June 4, 2008, the charge was suspended due to conflicting evidence. Over the subsequent 9 years, Gray's legal team pursued numerous appeals, primarily arguing that their client suffered from diminished capacity due to an abusive childhood. The case reached the Supreme Court, where it was summarily rejected in 2016. In November 2016, Gray was scheduled to be executed on January 18, 2017. On January 18, 2017, with all of his appeals exhausted, Ricky Gray was executed by lethal injection at Greensville Correctional Center. Ray Dandridge still remains incarcerated at Sussex II State Prison. The brutal murders of the Harvey family unleashed an overwhelming wave of horror and sorrow, with over 1,400 individuals attending their memorial service, expressing their condolences and grief. In front of Kathy's store, flowers and dolls piled up and formed a poignant tribute. Along the curb outside the red brick house, children placed candles which maintained their glow for weeks. A neighbor reflected on the community's collective mourning, stating, "We kept those candles lit for weeks." Kathy's brother, Culp, testified about the profound impact of the murders, describing them as a lightning bolt to the heart that felt bottomless. He further expressed, "It kills me to think about their last hours. We are all trying to get past this. You know, we owe it to them and to their spirit." Within Richmond's Forest Hill Park, an entrance to a footbridge is adorned with a granite monument, a poignant dedication to the Harvey family. This family, who had previously enjoyed many joyful moments at the site, saw their lives abruptly and tragically cut short. A bronze plaque, depicting their radiant smiles, serves as a commemoration of happier days before the unfathomable evil infiltrated their lives, devastating everything in its wake. It is sad and unfortunate what all the victims faced against these monsters. As we reflect on this heart-wrenching tale, our thoughts are with the victims whose lives were tragically cut short and the loved ones they left behind.